Come pick up your daughter's body. Those were the only words spoken by the killer before hanging up. 6 weeks earlier, Soraya Naderi had been forced to wear a wedding dress and smile for a ceremony she herself described as the end disguised as a beginning. She fled the war in Afghanistan in search of freedom, but found death inside a house in Perth, murdered by the man she had been forced to call her husband. And behind this brutal crime, there was something even more cruel: the silence of her own mother. Before dying in silence, Soraya Naderi wrote with fury. In her written diary, there were questions she never dared ask aloud. Is it a sin to dream of freedom? Or is it only a sin when you're the daughter of a mother who's afraid? Her teachers described her as brilliant, her classmates as kind. But inside her home, there were rules that hadn't changed with the humanitarian visa. She arrived in Australia at the age of 12, with feet still marked by the mud of the refugee camp and eyes with wonder and the clean streets of Melbourne. Soraya wanted to become a nurse, live alone, choose whom to love. But her mother, Yasmin, saw those dreams as threats. She said freedom corrupts, that honor was more important than happiness. And with that, the first conflict began. Two women exiled in the same country, yet trapped in opposite worlds. No one knows exactly when Yasmin began planning the first marriage. Maybe it was after the day she saw Soraya laughing with a classmate. Or maybe it was the pressure from older women in the community who said, a daughter without a husband is a mother without respect. But it all happened too fast, from a conversation in the mosque hallway to a ring on her finger. Only weeks passed. The ceremony was intimate, unregistered. Soraya didn't protest. Not yet. But days later she wrote a sentence no one read in time. This is not the beginning of my life. It's the end of what I could have been. It was the first marriage and also the first collapse. Divorce came, but shame remained. Yasmin felt dishonored. Soraya, for the first time, tasted the bitter truth of having a voice and not being heard. But what no one foresaw, not Yasmin, not Soraya, was that this first rupture would be used as justification for something far more cruel. And this time, there would be no diary, no school, no police able to stop what was coming. When Shakib appeared, no one asked if Soraya wanted him. They just said he was a good Muslim, hardworking and honorable. The fact that she barely knew him didn't matter, nor did the trauma of the previous marriage. In the community, what mattered was that she needed to start over, and fast. Yasmin saw in that man the chance to erase the past and restore her image before others. Soraya, however, didn't stay silent this time. She cried at school. She spoke to a teacher. She told her friend Lina, if I marry him, you'll never see me again. But no one grasped the exact weight of those words. Not yet. She was called in by federal police for a long conversation. She confessed she was being pressured. Officers offered help, but she hesitated. If I run, I lose my mother, she reportedly said. And so, out of love for the mother who punished her, Soraya accepted the ring that would silence her. The wedding was held in a hall decorated with white roses and golden carpets. For the guests, it was a reconciliation with God. For Soraya, a disguised funeral. She wore red, but walked as if carrying cement in her shoes. In a video, she gives a forced smile to the camera and lowers her eyes. 3 days later, she deleted all her social media accounts. She left only one phrase on her WhatsApp status. Sometimes silence is the only way to scream. What happened in the following days, no one publicly told. But clues appeared: unanswered messages, rejected calls, and a video sent by Anmar showing the house in disarray, as if they accused her of being a bad wife. Soraya, who once wrote poems, now barely spoke. Lina tried to call, the school called, but the answer was always the same. She's fine, she's just adjusting. But no one disappears from themselves because they're happy. And someone who once said, no carries in their eyes the memory of what happens when they're not heard. And in that house in Perth, Soraya's pain was no longer whispered. It was imprisoned. The last person to hear Soraya's voice alive was her brother Karim. And what he heard wasn't a cry for help. It was a phrase lost in the middle of a shout. Who are you talking to like that? After that, the phone fell. It was also the moment he was certain his sister wasn't just unhappy, she was in danger. In the days before, Soraya had vanished digitally. She'd no longer replied to Lina, nor read messages from school. Her mother said she was busy being a wife, but Karim suspected something. Amar started sending videos of the house to the family. Dirty dishes, mess, rags on the floor. No one understood at first until they realized he was trying to blame her, shame her, manipulate her. She had become a shadow. The young woman who smiled with her eyes now didn't even appear on video calls. When she answered, it was for seconds. Once she whispered, "I can talk now." Another time, she just looked at the screen and hung up. Yasmin pretended everything was normal, but inside, she already felt the collision between control and catastrophe. On that final call, Karim insisted. Ammar answered angrily, saying Soraya was his business and told her brother to mind his own life. That's when, in the background, Soraya appeared. Her voice was groggy, as if she had just woken up. "Who are you yelling at?" The answer never came, only the sound of something being thrown, and the line going silent. The next morning, Karim's phone rang again. It was Soraya's number, but it wasn't her. It was Ammar. In a dry, emotionless voice, he simply said, "Come pick up your daughter's body," and hung up. He was bleeding alone on the kitchen floor when the neighbors heard the muffled scream. But it was too late. Ammar had already washed his hands, grabbed the car keys, and driven to the nearest police station. He walked in with a stained shirt and a clean face, looked at the officer, and said, "I killed my wife. She didn't want me. She said she only married me because her mother told her so." In the apartment, the scene was one of silent brutality. There was no fight, no prolonged struggle, only the remains of an unfinished breakfast, a fallen chair, and a single sentence written on paper. "I tried." Next to her body lay the scarf she had worn at the wedding, now soaked in red. It was as if Soraya had died twice, once at the altar and again there, with no witnesses. At the station, Ammar didn't cry, he didn't run, he didn't try to defend himself. He said he felt ignored, rejected, used. Claimed Soraya didn't want to touch him, didn't treat him like a husband, didn't respect household duties. The officer asked, "And what did she say to you the morning of the crime?" He answered without hesitation. "She said she only married me out of obligation. That her mother decided." I snapped. While Soraya's body was taken to the morgue, the news exploded in Melbourne and Perth. A Muslim student had been murdered by her husband just weeks after an arranged marriage. But what wasn't yet clear to the press was what would come next. The case wouldn't end with a killer conviction. Someone else about to be called to justice, and this time the court wouldn't look back. The who put Soraya on that altar, and to who told her to stay silent. The trial of Ammar Shakib lasted less than a week. The prosecution presented the confession, the wedding videos, screenshots of Soraya's messages, and statements from the school, her friend Lina, and federal police. There was no doubt. He didn't just kill. He knew he was killing someone who had already said no multiple times, and no one listened. During the hearing, Ammar declared that he couldn't stand being treated like a stranger in his own home anymore. And when the judge asked why he didn't just ask for a divorce, he replied, "She wasn't my wife. She never was. They married her off to me like a piece of furniture." That sentence echoed through the courthouse halls, but not with the force it would days later, when the eyes of justice turned to another name on the record, Yasmin Naderi. The sentence was clear: life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years, no chance of appeal, no sign of remorse, but something still troubled the prosecutor. In Soraya's notes, there was a line underlined 3 times. "I don't know if I'm more afraid of him or her." And that was where the second phase of the process began. Obvious, but much harder. The Muslim community of Mildura was divided. Some said Soraya was a martyr, others that she was rebellious. The mother's name surfaced discreetly behind the scenes. She knew her daughter didn't want this. She pushed her. She forced her. The federal police reopened the files from the original interview. The video that once served as evidence against Ammar now became a key piece against Yasmin. And when prosecutors finally announced that she would be formally charged with coercing her daughter into a forced marriage, Australia came to a halt. Never before had a mother been brought to the defendant's bench for something so many called tradition. Yasmin Naderi entered the courtroom covered by a dark veil and surrounded by cameras. She wasn't a murderer, but she wasn't innocent either. For the first time in Australian history, a mother would stand trial under the formal accusation of forcing her own daughter into marriage. The country watched divided. Was this justice or an attack on culture? The prosecution was blunt. Soraya said no multiple times. To her mother, to her friend, to her school, to the police. Yasmin ignored them all. The defense tried to shift the focus, claimed she was a woman traumatized by war, a desperate mother, a foreign trying to keep her family structure alive in a world she didn't understand. But the evidence shattered any romanticism. Yasmin threatened, manipulated, isolated. During the trial, excerpts from Soraya's diary were read out loud. One caused an uproar. My mother doesn't hit me, but she crushes me with her eyes. If I run, she dies. If I stay, I die. The words hit the jury like a verdict without appeal. This wasn't just about culture, it was coercion, and coercion is a crime. The court heard trauma experts, human rights advocates, and religious leaders. Some claim Yasmin acted like many mothers would do in her situation. Others argued that this excuse was exactly what allowed tragedies like Soraya's to continue. In the end, the jury didn't hesitate. Guilty. 3 years in prison, a minimum of 1 year before parole. The sentence was considered lenient by some, symbolic by others, but undeniable history. And outside the courthouse, as activists celebrated and conservatives protested, one question hung in the air. How many Yasmin are still marrying off their daughters in silence? And how many Sorayas will still die unheard? Yasmin Naderi kept her eyes down as she walked through the corridors of the Victoria County Court. Covered in a dark veil and showing no emotion, she seemed to carry not only the guilt of a mother but the symbolic weight of an entire culture being put on trial. At 48, Yasmin became the first mother in Australia formally charged with forcing a daughter into marriage. And the entire country was watching. To some, she was a villain. To others, a victim of a world in collision. The prosecution was surgical. They presented Soraya's diaries entries, school reports, and testimony from federal police officers who interviewed her weeks before the wedding. They showed that Soraya not only refused the union, she begged for help. The defense, in turn, portrayed Yasmin as a woman scarred by decades of war, who knew only fear as a compass of tradition as a shield. They argued that she acted out of love. But love, the prosecution countered, does not coerce. Love listens, and Yasmin did not listen. In court, one passage from Soraya's diary silenced even the photographers. She doesn't hit me, but she crushes me with her eyes. She traps me with guilt, calls me dishonor. If I run, she dies inside. If I stay, I die on the outside. Those words, heavy with pain and clarity, became the heart of the case. The jury also heard from mental health experts, migration dynamic specialists, and women's rights advocates. Some argued Yasmin acted with the limits of her cultural understanding. Others countered that understanding does not mean acceptance, and that the country needed to draw a line. After 2 weeks of trial and less than 5 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read. Guilty. The sentence, 3 years in prison, with a minimum of 12 months before parole. It was a historic decision. Never before had anyone been convicted of this crime. The repercussions were immediate. For human rights groups, it was a victory. For conservative sectors of the community, a public humiliation. But in the end, what truly lingered was the question no one could bury. How many mothers are still choosing honor over living daughters? Yasmin Aderi's conviction was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a movement. Less than a month after the verdict, the Minister of Justice called an emergency press conference. Standing beside him were activists, legal experts, and representatives from migrant communities. The announcement was clear. Australia would create a new anonymous reporting system for forced marriage cases, one that would not require victims to immediately involve the police. It was a turning point. Until then, the fear of reporting one's own parents kept many young women from seeking help. Soraya's case exposed this flaw in a painful way. Even after speaking to teachers, friends, and even the federal police, she wasn't protected in time. The new program would allow NGOs, social workers, and community centers to serve as direct support channels offering discreet escape routes without requiring immediate family breakups. In addition, the federal government allocated $50 million for training in public schools, educational materials translated in more than 20 languages, and specialized psychological support for girls at risk. Soraya's name was mentioned in parliament, in public hearings, and in media campaigns. The case became not only a symbol but also a technical reference for public policy. The reaction divided society. In multicultural neighborhoods, religious leaders expressed concern about stigmatizing traditions. Meanwhile, young immigrants and refugees saw Soraya as a mirror, a girl who didn't hate her culture but wanted to choose, and was punished for it. Organizations like My Blue Sky and Project Resilience reported 300% increase in requests for legal guidance in the months following Yasmin's sentencing. But perhaps the greatest impact was invisible. The case changed the language. Instead of speaking only about arranged marriage, people began using the word that truly hurt, forced. And with it, other truth came to light about guilt, silence, emotional pressure, and to fear of dishonoring loved ones. It was a collective shock. Soraya didn't live to see any of this happen. But without her, none of it would have been possible. And in every girl who can now say no and be heard, Soraya's voice lives on. The impact of Soraya's case didn't end with newspapers or courtrooms. It cracked open the walls inside homes themselves. In the Afghan community of Mildura and all the multicultural neighborhoods across Australia, the name Soraya stopped being just a name. It became an invisible line dividing mothers and daughters, religious leaders and teenagers, men who repeated, "That's how it's always been," and girls who now asked, "And why does it have to be?" Some families withdrew further, fearing exposure. Others began for the first time to talk about consent, fear, and the boundary between care and coercion. At the mosque, the local imam dedicated an entire Friday sermon to explaining the true meaning of the word nikah, the marriage contract in Islam, and made it clear that without genuine consent, there is no blessing. Some applauded, others ignored. Mothers started watching their daughters with new unease. Fathers, previously absent from such decisions, now began asking, does she really want this? Girls who weren't silent began to write, to talk to each other, to seek legal protection even before something happened. The fear didn't disappear, but something far more threatening to the old system was born: awareness. But there was pain too. Many young women felt like traitors for questioning their families. They felt guilty for wanting freedom. They didn't want to abandon their roots, but they didn't want to die in them either. Soraya's case exposed the cruelest dilemma for those living between cultures. How do you honor tradition without losing yourself? And so, even after the burial, Soraya's name kept being whispered in school hallways, in community meetings, bedrooms of girls who now knew that saying no could cost everything, but could also save lives. Because if she had been hurt, she might not have been a martyr. She would have been what she always wanted to be: a young Afghan woman, Australian by right, and the owner of her own destiny. 6 months after the verdict, Soraya Naderi's name appeared in an unexpected place, on the cover of a Ministry for Women report titled, "When Silence Kills: Lessons from the Soraya Case." The document would be distributed in public schools, health departments, community centers, and police stations as official training material. Soraya had become a symbol, not just of pain, but of change. In teacher training programs, her name was mentioned as a warning. If a student starts to distance herself from friends, stop participating in class, and show signs of distress without an obvious reason, don't ignore it. That's how it started with Soraya. Newly graduated police officers watched reenactments based on her case. Social workers read excerpts from her diary as examples of emotional red flags. For the first time, the education and public safety systems were being treated to recognize what had long been dismissed as a family problem. In cultural and integration classes for new immigrants, the case was presented with respect, but without softening the truth. Arranged marriage is different from forced marriage. Soraya didn't choose. She spoke up, and still she died. The phrase became a campaign slogan on social media, train station banners, and even on bilingual pamphlets distributed in consulates. Her story stopped being just a tragedy. It became a tool. NGOs began using the name Project Soraya for initiatives aimed at protecting young women at risk. Community psychologists received funding to provide specialized care for trauma linked to family coercion. And across several states, small rapid response units were formed to intervene discreetly when a suspect case arose in schools or religious communities. But among all the technical infrastructure, there was one simple, powerful detail: the gaze of other girls. Girls like Hina, like Farida, like Layla, who, when they saw Soraya's name on a pamphlet, understood they were no longer alone, because someone like them had screamed. Too late to save herself, but loud enough to save others. At first, Soraya was remembered as a victim, but time did something different with her memory. She stopped being just a girl who died in a forced marriage and became recognized as what she tried to be: a voice. A voice that warned, that wrote, that begged for help, and now speaks for those who still cannot. At schools she attended, classmates started wearing bracelets with her initials, SN, engraved discreetly. Teachers created listening groups for immigrant girls. The school where she spent her final years placed a small plaque in front of the nursing lab, in honor of those who dream of caring, even when no one cared for them. Soraya's name no longer generated fear, it sparked conversation. Influencers of Afghan Armenian, and Sudanese heritage began talking about the case in short videos explaining the difference between respecting culture and silent submission. In one viral post, a phrase appeared over a photo of Soraya with her face partially covered. She wasn't too Western, she just wanted to choose. The simple distinction began to change the way even the most conservative families discussed the issue at home. In progressive Islamic centers, imams started including sermons about the true role of consent in Islam. In one of these sermons, a leader said, "If the Prophet asked his wives if they wanted, who are we to decide for our daughters?" The phrase spread across the country. This was no longer just a legal issue. It was a matter of faith, dignity, and listening. Soraya became a symbol in silence, but not alone. Her death united voices that once feared speaking out. Students, mothers, educators, legal experts, community leaders, and survivors began saying her name not with sorrow, but with strength. She was the memory of everything people tried to ignore. And now, every time a young woman says, "I don't want this," there is someone ready to listen, because she died saying no. And now, that no echoes in every place where yes has been forced for far too long. Soraya Naderi didn't die because she loved her culture less. She died because she loved life too much and dared to want to live in her own terms. She didn't disrespect her mother. She didn't dishonor her faith. She didn't break a code of conduct. She simply said no to a marriage she didn't choose. And that no was ignored with the same indifference as a car horn in the middle of the night. Annoying, but easy to throw out. She was buried with her wedding veil still stained with blood. A scarf that was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter became a symbol of the end. But Soraya didn't disappear. She lives in the laws that change, in the campaigns that emerge, in the manuals that teach teachers how to listen better. She lives in the eyes of every girl who now understands the obedience is not love, and respect must include listening. The mother was convicted, the husband too. Justice did what it could after the crime happened, but the real verdict that weighs on us as a society is another. How many Sorayas are still speaking to no one? How many are smiling wedding photos with broken hearts? How many are writing in diaries that no one will read in time? This story isn't just about death, it's about what happens when silence is valued more than freedom, when tradition becomes a cage, when love turns into fear, and when yes is thought as the only possible answer, even if it hurts, even if it bleeds, and even if it kills. Soraya said no. She said it to her mother, to her friends, to her school, to the police. She wasn't silent. We were deaf. Next time when another girl says no, let the world stop. Let the teacher listen. Let the mother think twice. Let the community choose the daughter, not its reputation. Because Soraya wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to study, to travel, maybe to love one day. She wanted to live. And if she couldn't live, then at least let the world learn from her death. She wasn't heard in time, but now the whole world is listening.